They have big hearts and usually don't worry too much about theology. Sometimes they are silent, often fading into the woodwork, but when someone is hurting, they are the first to make a phone call, to make a meal, stop by for a visit. They may not always be the first people who come to mind when you think about the church, but they make the church a better place just by the way they care. I call them the caregivers. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas, and this is your daily devotional for Friday, May 12th, 2023. Caregivers really span the spectrum. Some are lively and outgoing, while others are quiet, not wanting to draw attention to themselves. Unlike some of the other faces of faith, they are not easy to characterize in terms of their personalities. Extrovert, introvert, friendly, reserved, funny, serious. They really can be all kinds of things. But what marks them and sets them apart is the way they just seem to know instinctively who needs a little extra TLC, maybe a word of encouragement, maybe a sympathetic ear, maybe just a card in the mail. Now, my pattern in talking about the different faces of faith has been to suggest some weaknesses as well as some of the strengths each one brings to the table. In this case, though, I am hard-pressed to think of any real weaknesses or drawbacks of the caregivers, at least not on the whole. Obviously, individuals have their own particular faults, but as one of the faces of faith, caregivers on the whole have very few faults. What they do for the church and for people in the church is simply a gift, and one that cannot be overestimated. So, instead of describing strengths and weaknesses, let me just tell a couple of stories about what I've seen in my years of ministry. There's a woman I know who is one of those highly organized people who just knows how to get stuff done. She's a no-nonsense, task-oriented soul. Often people like this are not caregivers, but in her case, her organizational ability and task orientation is a real asset. Part of her secret, I think, is that she's in touch with a lot of different people, so information flows to her and through her. That's how she knows who's in need. And she has that knack of knowing just exactly what has to be done at any given time. Sometimes it's recruiting a group of people to visit or take food. Other times it's making sure that the people who need to know. And that includes me. She's often the first person I hear who lets me know that there is a pastoral care situation that I need to attend to. Then there's the man I know who is generous with his time, even though he has a lot going on. But if there's someone who needs a regular visit, he's the first to let me know and helps me organize visits to that person. He knows I'm pretty scattered, so he just gently reminds me that I do need to go and see someone who's been feeling neglected, and often makes those visits with me. He's a retired executive, not the sort you'd ordinarily think of as a caregiver, but he just seems to know who needs some care from the church. I could go on and on, way beyond these two, but they're pretty good illustrations. Now, I said I can't think of many faults of caregivers, but there is one sort of cautionary note about them. Many caregivers have what I would call poor boundaries, in the sense that they can be so focused on the needs of others that they fail to allow themselves the care they need. I see this all the time. At its worst, it can lead to exhaustion and even to a certain amount of resentment. Not all caregivers fall into this trap, but it happens often enough that I see it happen regularly and I know that it's a pattern. And when exhaustion or resentment set in, the caregiver's ability to care declines until others wonder what's happened. At times like these, the caregiver himself or herself needs a caregiver, another person who has been there and knows what it's like to give and feel as though their generosity is taken for granted. To these caregivers, I can say two things. First, it's okay to do a little bit of self-care and not feel guilty about it. you are not superhuman. Your ability to care for others has limits. And if it's important to continue caring for others, it is also important to build in time to care for yourself. Second, while nobody may have said thank you to you, I know from personal experience that people do appreciate it, even if they can't express it in the moment. After all, they're hurting, and they are not exactly in a place to say thank you. But I've had enough people write me or call me and tell me about some kindness I had done years before that I had long since forgotten about. When they do that, it reminds me that people do remember and they do appreciate it. I figure that for every one person who tells me they appreciate something I did 5, 10, 20 years ago, there are 10 or 20 or 100 more who feel the same way, but who never thought to say anything. These occasional expressions of gratitude are enough to keep me going. So, of all the faces of faith, the caregivers may not be the ones to garner the most attention, but they really make a difference in our lives. Tomorrow, we'll wrap up our look at the many faces of faith. But for now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.